Oh, hello again, fight fans. I'm Michael Montero for Boxing Monthly. We're classing it up here in the neutral corner this week. I actually shaved this morning, I brushed my teeth, I cut my nails, and I'm enjoying a nice sparkling wine. And I'm in a robe, motherfucker! Who else does a boxing show in a robe, huh? Riddle me that. Nobody. Nothing but the best here on the neutral corner. This is actually an early Christmas present from Tiffany. She let me open up one of my Christmas presents early, and it's this nice, sleek robe. It feels good. It's made for the tall, large man such as myself, so my legs are covered right now, and there's nothing underneath. Okay, enough of that. Probably getting a little too personal. We got a lot of boxing to talk about, guys. So I'm going to put timestamps. Don't worry, it's going to be another long episode, but it's going to be all good. Let's get into some news and notes. Okay, so we got some official fight announcements. I've talked about some of this stuff before, but we're starting to get particulars now, okay? The Miguel Cotto, James Kirkland fight is a done deal. That's happening in February. I've talked about that. You guys know it's pay-per-view, but now we're finding out that there's a catchweight. 153 pounds. Miguel Cotto loves him some catchweights, but this is pretty goddamn ridiculous. Not too long ago, he was the quote-unquote middleweight champ, right? Fighting guys at 160, but draining them down. And that whole lineage there got perverted. I don't know what the hell this is. This is like baby junior middleweight, 153 pounds. Kirkland hasn't fought since getting destroyed by Canelo Alvarez. If you look at Kirkland, the last 5-6 years of his career, man, very inactive. He's had long spurts of inactivity. He's had jail time. He's gone back and forth with Ann Wolfe. Sometimes he's in shape, sometimes he's not. This whole thing has disaster written all over it. And then when you factor in, Cotto's got that $10 million guarantee from Roc Nation, it makes sense why they have to go pay-per-view to try to come anywhere close to making their money back. They're not going to. They're going to take another huge loss on this one. They've taken several losses with the fighters they've signed so far. What I don't get is HBO agreeing to this. It's a bad look. Remember, HBO passed on that Manny Pacquiao pay-per-view against Jesse Vargas, right? And that was actually a financial success. Top Rank made money. Not only did they do a very good gate, they did a very good crowd at the arena, but they did over 300,000 buys. So it was a financial success, and HBO said no. They claim the people at HBO said no because they thought it was going to be a financial failure. But you guys know my theory. I think that Manny Pacquiao's religious views, his political views, he's gone very far conservative, and HBO is very far liberal. They are left of MSNBC, okay? They have clear agendas. And I think that had a lot to do with them wanting out of the Pacquiao business. But for them to decline Pacquiao, one of pretty much the only huge crossover star remaining in the sport, because Floyd's technically retired right now, for them to pass on that and then take this one, look, HBO does a lot of business with Roc Nation, Jay-Z, Beyonce. They've showed her concerts. They've done a lot of business with those guys. Don't think for a second that this whole thing doesn't have anything to do with that. Just not a good look for HBO. They are off to a shit start in 2017, in my opinion, and they didn't have a very good second half to 2016. But anyway, big fight. Wladimir Klitschko, Anthony Joshua, done deal. After Joshua's win against Eric Molina, which we'll talk more about in a second, Saturday, third round destruction, Wladimir Klitschko was ringside. He jumped right up in the ring. Eddie Hearn grabbed the mic and announced the fight. I love this. The British promoters get it. Eddie Hearn is hands down the promoter of the year in 2016, and he's on his way to being promoter of the year in 2017 already. So you had Vlad, you had AJ, and you had Eddie Hearn right there in the ring announcing this thing for April 29th at Wembley. That's huge, man. And we'll see just how big of a star AJ is. We know he sells out O2 Arena. We know he's huge already in London. But look, that's about 20,000. Wembley, I believe, seats upwards of 90,000. I'm not quite sure how big they can scale it for boxing. But if this fight does a crowd of 70, 80,000, that's huge. You guys got to remember, this is going to be just the 19th pro fight for Anthony Joshua. So if he could do a crowd like that and take on an opponent like this in his 19th pro fight, that's a big deal. At the time that fight happens, Klitschko is going to be coming off a 1.5-year layoff. At this stage of his career, that's either really going to help him because he's been in this game for so long and his body's taken a lot of wear and tear, or it's really going to hurt him because he's going to have a ton of ring rust. He looked very rusty against Tyson Fury last year. After a 1.5-year layoff, how is it going to look against Joshua? One other thing I have to bring up very, very quickly. I'm not going to talk too much about this now. I'm sure we'll be talking about it in the future. Anthony Joshua, not currently enrolled in VADA, with the Voluntary Anti-Doping Association. Wladimir Klitschko was enrolled in VADA with Tyson Fury for their rematch. You guys know there was issues with Tyson Fury popping for tests before the first fight, but Klitschko wasn't made aware of it until 6 or 7 months after they fought first, and then Vlad said, "What the hell, why didn't you guys tell me?" UKADA, which is basically the UK version of USADA, really dropped the ball on that one. They were supposed to have a hearing with Tyson Fury. They still haven't had the hearing. So I think USADA is compromised here in America. I think UKADA is questionable over in the UK. And Klitschko demanded for the rematch with Fury that they use VADA. If I'm Wladimir Klitschko, I'm demanding VADA testing for this fight with Anthony Joshua. Not casting aspersions, not insinuating anything, but Anthony Joshua dwarfed Wladimir Klitschko in the ring. And for a guy that big to be that jacked, in this day and age, with all the stuff going on out there, it just is a bad look if this thing isn't VADA. So more to come on that. But as of now, that fight is official. And we're really seriously considering, Tiffany and I, coming out to the UK to cover that one. I've never been to London. And of course, that means I've never been to Wembley. Just to be part of a spectacle like that, I'm going to do everything in my power to get out there. More to come with that. Let's see, what else? HBO, look, I've talked about them having a rough start. That Klitschko-Joshua fight, I imagine would be on Showtime because I don't believe Klitschko is contractually obligated to fight on HBO. Of course, AJ is obligated to fight on Showtime. So that's going to go over to Showtime and help them have a good fight in the second quarter. They already have a great schedule in the first quarter. HBO is coming out with a documentary about Muhammad Ali. Look, Legendary Nights was a beloved series by boxing fans. They haven't touched it for years, and there have been so many great stories that they could tell. The Muhammad Ali thing has been overdone, in my opinion. Look, I talked about him. I did a video about him here on my channel and paid my respects, my homage to him. All fight fans have. He was a very complicated guy. There was just as much bad as there was good in his life. He was a flawed individual. The thing with HBO, and again, this goes to their political agenda, and they don't even hide it anymore. They really don't talk about the bad. They just talk about the good. And they've already done documentaries on it. It's over, guys. Let's move forward. 10 years after his death, if it's the anniversary of his death, do something. You know, talk about the legacies left behind 10 years after his death. But dude, it hasn't even been a year yet. You can't get fights done right now. If you're Peter Nelson and the guys there, you're not able to get fights done that your subscribers want. Golovkin-Jacobs still isn't done. Andre Ward in interviews is talking about retiring possibly instead of doing the rematch with Sergey Kovalev. You need to put your foot down and get some damn fights signed instead of doing Muhammad Ali documentaries less than a year after his death. That's just my opinion on that. One last thing with news and notes, and then we'll get into the review of last week's action. Crawford Molina, which was on HBO. Not a very good fight. Not the best card, top to bottom, when you factor in also the AJ fight. It did 800,000 views on average, a little over 800,000, peaked at 871. Considering the magnitude of that fight, I'm talking about the main event, Crawford-Molina, that's a pretty good rating. And also you have to consider all the sports, the winter sports going on right now in America and everything. Pretty good rating. You compare that to Showtime's card with, I think it was the much better card with Charlo Williams and Cuellar Mares. And let me take back what I said before. I said Joshua Molina, that was of course on Showtime. The heavyweight fight on HBO is Parker Ruiz, so my mistake on that. But I think Showtime had the better card. Their average view, 327K. Max was 377K. Just goes to show you, even if you have a better card top to bottom, you're not necessarily going to do a better rating. Guys, it's about building stars. And Abner hasn't fought since last year. Jesus Cuellar, I'm not sure if he's fought on American television. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he's an Argentinian fighter that speaks no English. As far as I remember, he hasn't been on American air, at least not yet this year. Then in the co-main, which was a great fight, both J-Rock and Charlo have only fought once this year, right? So if you don't have your guys fighting often, if you're not building stories, if you're not building fighters up, you don't do a good rating. Even though it was a better card. Then you look at HBO. You know, the heavyweight fight was between two guys that nobody really knew, at least among casual fans here in America. And the co-main, you could say the same thing. But that main event, it was Terence Crawford. And yes, it was a mismatch. Terence Crawford hasn't been the most exciting fighter this year, but he's fought 3 times. It was in his hometown. They did another massive crowd. The crowd set a record for a boxing crowd in Omaha. And I believe it set a record for the live gate amount it generated, the revenue it generated there in Omaha. So you're building a star. And this was his 3rd fight of this year. And he's been featured on HBO Air for a few years now. And he's fought several times, right? They've done features on him. They've promoted him. And you do a decent rating. Not an amazing rating, but all things considered, you're going head-to-head with the other network. You got everything else going on. Mismatch fight. Pretty damn good rating, even though it wasn't the best fight of the night, because they're building a brand. That's what I mean, guys. You have to fight often. You have to build a brand. You have to tell a story. If you do that, if you build it, they will come. But that's enough of the news and notes. Let's talk about what happened in the ring last week. Over in New Zealand, which was very, very early in the morning here for me in LA when this fight was going on, Joseph Parker wins a majority decision over Andy Ruiz to grab the vacant WBO titles. The scores were 115-113 twice, and a third judge had it a draw at 114-114. Let me go ahead and get this out of the way because this is going to be the theme of this episode. Both fighters are enrolled in VADA. So this fight was certified clean. Both guys in VADA, okay? Joseph Parker, look, this was a close fight. Neither guy looked very good. Joseph Parker, I believe, was the heaviest he's ever been in this fight by a few pounds. Andy Ruiz, his weight has gone up and down. He's been lighter. He's been heavier. But you got the feeling that Parker was a little more consistent throughout. His work rate was never high. Ruiz had periods where his work rate was higher, and then he had periods where his work rate was low. You know, so you had one guy kind of here, and you had one guy kind of doing this. But at the end, I had the sense at the end of that fight that Andy Ruiz just kind of let it go. He kind of gave it away. I thought that it was pretty much an even fight going into the championship rounds, and if Ruiz really sat down on it and really went for it and threw 100 punches around there at the end, he could have got this win, man. A lot of people have called this home cooking for Joseph Parker because some people felt Andy Ruiz won. And look, it was a close fight. It's cliche. It was a close fight that could have went either way. I personally didn't have a problem with Parker winning it. I could have lived with a draw, but I think Parker, all things considered, may have just done slightly more. But just to put that to bed, look, the judges for this fight were from Argentina, Germany, and the Philippines. The ref and the supervisor there were both American. So a pretty neutral officials working the fight, okay? We've seen some decisions recently go to house fighters where all the officials were from the same country as the house fighter. That's not what happened here. So Joseph Parker has a a heavyweight title right now, but he's still a prospect. He really is still a prospect. He didn't set the world on fire here. Overall, though, if you look at where he was at the beginning of this year, you look at where he is now, there's some progression. But man, he still needs a lot of work. There's still a lot of wrinkles to iron out. But he boxed 39 rounds in 2016. And he fought some solid opposition. If you compare Joseph Parker's pro resume to Anthony Joshua's, it's night and day. I'm sorry. I know Anthony Joshua has been dominant, but I'm talking about level of opposition thus far. Parker's fought the better opposition. You could make an argument, won't go this far, but you could make an argument, a logical argument, that he's almost on par with Deontay Wilder when you look at the level of opposition. Because Andy Ruiz, say what you will, he's a skilled guy with some experience. He's a prospect himself, but he's a legitimate heavyweight prospect. And coming into this fight, undefeated, had some decent wins, has some good craft, was a good amateur. So that is a good win. Maybe didn't look great for Parker, but it's a good win. And then Carlos Takam and Alexander Dimitrenko, a guy who's been ranked. I'm not calling those guys world beaters by any means, but they're certainly higher up than Dominic Breazeale, Dillian Whyte, Charles Martin, those kind of guys. So let's not write off Joseph Parker quite yet. Based on what we saw in this fight, do I think he's somebody that's going to clean out the division and hold this title for years to come? No. But I do think that he's going to have at least a couple of defenses there in New Zealand where they did a big crowd for this fight. They did big business out there in Australia. Bob Arum, as I mentioned last week, bought the promotional rights. Top Rank owns the rights for Joseph Parker in China, so you can expect to see him on one of those Macau cards. They could try to build something up there. And there's a lot of Chinese that live in Australia and vacation down there and vice versa. So there's a connection there. It's smart business. And the rights for the tape delay views here in America, Top Rank's going to own a piece of that. So you're going to see this guy more on HBO. He's going to have at least a couple of defenses of this title to make some money. And then let's see, maybe somebody will work their way up into a mandatory position, and we'll see possibly him in another big, highly competitive fight toward the end of next year. I don't see any unification fights or anything like that happening. For Andy Ruiz, it's kind of back to the drawing board. Here's the thing with him. Again, close fight that could have went either way. He lost a close one on the road. It was a majority decision. There's no shame in that. If he comes back here and stays in the gym and stays in shape and gets his weight even lower, I want to say he was like maybe in the 250s for this fight. Don't quote me. Lower than he's been, but still not great. If he can get that weight down into like the mid 230s or something and stay active. He was active this year. I think he fought 4 times this year himself. If he stays active and stays in the gym, he just started training up in Big Bear with Abel Sanchez. He's still got a future in this business, man, and he's still got a future in this division. So don't write off either of these guys. This was a crossroads kind of fight, but I think both guys come from this with a lot of questions still unanswered, but a few questions answered at the same time. It was a progression for them. They're still prospects. They're contenders now. I'd say they're both top 10 heavyweights. Maybe lower top 10, but top 10. So not a loss for either guy. Obviously, Parker's going to make some more money. But for Ruiz right now, man, he needs to just stay active and get back at it. And he could work himself back into a rematch or something toward the end of next year. Let's talk about the other heavyweight fight over in Manchester. It was Anthony Joshua's first time over there. Did a big crowd, very enthusiastic, scores a 3rd round TKO over Eric Molina to defend the IBF heavyweight title that they won earlier this year. AJ is now 18-0 with 18 knockouts. But, look, it's impressive. He's doing big business. He's being absolutely dominant. But who has he fought at this point? He hasn't had that gut check yet. So those questions still remain. What happens when he takes a big shot from a top 10, top 15 heavyweight? That's going to be interesting to see. And if the fight with Wladimir Klitschko ends up coming off, as it should, April 29th, we'll get answers to some of those questions. We'll talk about this subject again right here. Anthony Joshua not enrolled in VADA testing. Eric Molina is enrolled in the VADA program. Not a good look. I just don't understand it. And again, I'm not making any accusations, but if you're Eddie Hearn and you're trying to build this brand with Anthony Joshua, why not enroll in VADA and just get that done? There are fighters all over the world. It's not just an American program. So if you guys are thinking that, think of Lucas Brown, who just popped, right? Think of Alexander Povetkin, who popped earlier this year. There's fighters all over the world in VADA, all throughout Latin America and Europe doing VADA testing. It's just not a good look. It's not smart from a marketing and branding perspective. Anthony Joshua needs to get enrolled in VADA in 2017. Not a good look. This was a stacked undercard. Khalid Yafai scores a unanimous decision victory over Luis Concepcion, who didn't make weight. He struggled to make weight and just looked flat, looked dead, was a dead man walking at the weigh-in, and it carried over into the ring. But for Yafai, he's 21-0 with 14 knockouts, wins the vacant WBA 115-pound title. It was pretty much a shutout. Scores 120-108, 119-108, 117-110. Controlled the action throughout. So good win for him. And now the youngster has a title. That's a really, really great performance. He did what he was supposed to do against a veteran who had a lot more experience, but he came in there drained. And the kid just outworked him all night. Just boxed circles around him. Also on the card, Scott Quigg and Callum Smith and Luis Ortiz scored W's. But the fight of the night, the heavyweight fight, actually just the overall fight of the weekend all around, and right up there with Vargas Salido for fight of the year contention. Dillian Whyte scores a split decision over Dereck Chisora. These were two guys that had a lot of bad blood during the promotion, talked a lot of trash. There was all these circus kind of antics, WWE stuff. They weren't bullshitting. They meant it. And it carried over into the ring. These guys fought hard. Dillian Whyte wins by scores of 115-113, 115-114, and one judge had it for Chisora, 115-114. This was another fight that could have went either way. Dillian Whyte, who is enrolled in VADA testing, Dereck Chisora is not. Just putting that out there. Dillian Whyte, there you go, British fighter enrolled in VADA testing. So for some of you who are questioning, well, Anthony Joshua doesn't have to do it because he's a British fighter and that's an American thing. That's not true. This fight, Whyte-Chisora, was a WBC title eliminator, which I don't understand why both fighters weren't enrolled in VADA if it's a WBC thing, because I thought all ranked WBC fighters had to do VADA, but I don't know. More inconsistencies on that one. Dillian Whyte improves to 20-1 with 15 knockouts, and now he's the WBC mandatory for the eventual winner of Deontay Wilder, and I think it will be Alexander Povetkin. He's fighting Bermane-Stiverne coming up. I'll talk about that in a second, but I believe that will be Povetkin. So the eventual winner between Wilder and Povetkin, I guess Dillian Whyte will get a crack at them. I don't know the timeline, but I imagine within the next year that fight will happen, maybe 18 months. But that'll be interesting, real interesting, because say what you will about Dillian Whyte, I think with this win, he probably now is a top 15 heavyweight. And he showed some real toughness and grit. Both men did. Great fight. It's on YouTube. My boy, David Boy Essex, who uploads all the stuff. Check him out. That fight's on there, and it's high quality, all that stuff. Really, really good heavyweight scrap. Probably the best heavyweight scrap, top to bottom, in years. I still think that Vargas Salido is my pick for fight of the year. I just think that there was just a higher level of craft in that fight, particularly with the inside fighting and some of the adjustments that were being made by both fighters. Subtle craft, but it was there. And they're just higher in their respective division than these guys are in the heavyweight division. So Vargas Salido still edges out fighter of the year for me, but Whyte-Chisora, absolutely fight of the year candidate, man. It's up there, the top 2 or 3 for 2016. Let's come over here to the States and let's talk about Well, we'll go with the fights here in Los Angeles that I was ringside for. Jermall Charlo scores a fifth-round TKO over Julian Williams to defend his IBF 154-pound title. He dropped Julian Williams in the second round with a jab. And Julian kind of stepped into it, was off balance, but got up and his legs weren't quite under him. Didn't look right after that. He settled in the third and fourth rounds, and all three judges scored those rounds for him. In fact, at the time of the stoppage in the fifth, the scores were 38-37 three times. So in terms of rounds, the judges had to fight even in the fifth round. But in the fifth round, Williams shot, I believe it was a 1-2. There was at least a right hand in there. Charlo saw it coming. And if you look at the replay, his eyes were wide open the whole time. Saw the shot coming, slipped it, did a half step back, and came up, corked with a right uppercut that nailed Williams. It really was a beautiful, beautiful counterpunch. Williams went down, being the tough badass that he is, he got up and tried to fight, pretty much just on instinct. He was done at that point. Charlo, jumped right on him, and Williams was down again, and the referee just waved it off, didn't even bother counting. So, good dominant win by Jermall Charlo, who looked like a light heavyweight. Looked like a light heavyweight in there versus a junior middleweight. Julian Williams really is a good size junior middleweight himself, but he looked like a natural junior middleweight in there. Jermall Charlo, I have no idea how he made that freaking weight. In the main event, Abner scores a split decision win over Jesus Cuellar to take his WBA regular featherweight title. The WBA and their freaking titles. Ugh, it never ends. So now Abner Mares, look, who I thought was pretty much done. I had to eat a lot of crow on this one. He looked good. Trainer Robert Garcia got Mares back to basics, back to boxing. Some of the stuff he used to do when he was undefeated and people were talking about putting him on the pound-for-pound list. And he had won titles in multiple divisions, right? Well, now he has another title. And in this fight, I felt he won 8 rounds. It wasn't the most exciting, dynamic fight. There was some holding and grappling, and it got a little nasty in there at times. But I felt that Mares controlled the action. I think he clearly won 7 or 8 rounds right in there. The one judge who had it, let's see, Kermit Bayless scored. That's Kenny Bayless's brother, who works for the California State Athletic Commission here. He scored it 115-112 for Cuellar, who was dropped in the 11th round. So that means he thought the Argentinian fighter won 8 rounds. I have no idea what fight he was watching. The other judges had it 116-111 for Mares and 117-110. I think that 117-110 card is way too wide. The 116-111, that's pretty much how I saw it on fight night. But for Mares, he's probably going to go after the winner of the Frampton-Santa Cruz rematch next month. That's the no-brainer. And if you're Al Heyman and promoter Richard Schaefer, who's kind of, I think, going to be a shill promoter for Al Heyman, that's the obvious place to go, right? If somehow Leo Santa Cruz pulls it off and he wins the rematch, well, then you do the rematch with Abner Mares in LA. That was one of the most successful PBC fights ever, the first one, in terms of ratings and actual tickets sold, not given away, but sold. You have to figure the rematch would be even bigger. If Frampton wins it, maybe Mares would be willing to go over to the UK and fight Frampton there. That's a very winnable fight for Frampton, and that's another title, right? And it's a very good payday for Abner Mares. And he'd be a live dog in that fight. Don't get me wrong. He'd be a very live dog, but you'd have to favor Frampton. But I think, and Frampton has shown a willingness to fight here in America. So maybe they do something like that in Vegas. Maybe they bring Frampton to LA. He's already done New York. He's about to do Vegas. Maybe they put it in LA. So lots of options there, but that's where I think Mares is going to go next, in that direction. Also on this card, prospects, Sergey Lipinets and Erickson Lubin win fights. Lipinets won a bloody, old-school battle. He had a very entertaining fight in this card. If you can find it on YouTube, check it out. Also, Jose Cito Lopez got back in the win column. I think he only had a 6-rounder, but he got in there and got a win. After this fight, after the card, we did the post-fight press conference there in the bowels of the Galen Center there at University of Southern California. And by the way, the announced crowd was 5,680, I believe, right over 5,600. So not the biggest crowd, but considering all the entertainment options you have here in LA, and again, these weren't the most active fighters, and there was only one of them based out here in Los Angeles, and that's Abner, and he hasn't fought in a year and a half. Considering all that, maybe not the worst crowd ever. Pretty decent crowd. They were lively. After the fight, at the post-fight press conference, I am the only media member, and I'm going to give my shoulder here a taparoo, tap myself on the shoulder. I'm the only one who brought up the subject of drug testing. None of the headliners, 0 of the 4 headliners on this card, on a major American network, a major American fight card, are enrolled in VADA. I know Sergey Lipinets is. He was on the undercard, untelevised, right? So I think a couple of the untelevised undercard fighters were, but none of the headliners. And when I saw Charlo, and again, I'm not making accusations, but when I saw Charlo eat flush right hands from J-Rock and not even blink, when I saw the way he was raging after the fight and getting up in J-Rock's ass and talking shit, and the commission officials had to separate them. Louis Perry, who is a California State Athletic Commission official, he does security work for him. He's a super awesome man, great family. He's just a really cool guy when I see him at the fights. He's a big dude. He runs a security company, one of the most successful security companies in America, and does this stuff on the side because he loves it. He had to take Charlo and just push him back. If you look, the big dude that kind of pushes Charlo back, that's Louis Perry. But man, the way that Charlo was raging, and I saw him and his brother at the fight hotel later. Myself and Tiffany and Steve Kim ended up hanging out with Julian Williams and his trainer, Steven, and their family and some friends at the fight hotel. And we saw the Charlos there. And man, the eyes were bulging. They just looked like they were ready to murder an animal. They just looked very, very hyped up still. I don't know, man. I just, again, not making any accusations, just not a good look. And when I asked Richard Schaefer there at the press conference, all the people in the media, it was the typical, a lot of these guys just are happy to be there and they don't want to lose that press credential, and they're asking the fighters questions, and they're asking the same kind of questions about the knockdown and the win and who's next and all this crap. And Demetrius Andrade was there and crashed it. He said he wanted a piece of Charlo, and there was all that stuff. I'm the one dude who asked an actual journalistic question. And I grabbed the mic and said, this question's for Richard. I think we posted the video so you guys can see it, but I asked him point blank, and I was sitting right in front of him. And Richard was not prepared to answer that question. I asked him who did the drug testing. And he said, we have used USADA in the past. We used VADA a couple times, but USADA did most of the drug testing. When he was saying we, I think he was referring to back when he worked for Golden Boy Promotions and they worked with Al Heyman. They used VADA just a couple times, and VADA popped several of their fighters. Several, not one, not two, but several of them. The first 2 or 3 times they used VADA, they never used VADA again. This is the old Golden Boy Promotions, not the new Golden Boy, okay? This is before that big split happened. Since that time, Al Heyman, who went off and did his own thing, and now Richard Schaefer's probably going to work with him with this Ringstar Sports thing, haven't used VADA once. Heyman has used USADA, some of his clients, but I've talked about the concerning relationship there and some of the things that I think are compromised with USADA, right? But to say we have used them in the past, Ringstar Sports hasn't used anybody. This was Ringstar Sports' first card. So that answer didn't sit well with me. So then I asked Richard, wait a second. So USADA did the testing? Is that who did the testing for this card? And he said, I don't know. And he turned, not to J-Rock's team, who was on his right. He turned to Charlo's team on his left. It said, who did the drug testing, guys? I shit you not. He asked Jermall Charlo. And his team said, oh, it's just the state. So that was it. So the California State Athletic Commission tests, which are the little urine test, which doesn't test for everything. It doesn't test for most of the most dangerous stuff that the blood tests check for. And based on just timing and diluting your urine, there's a million tricks you could do. IV, there's a million things you can do to pass those tests. But I remember going to a California State Athletic Commission workshop last year and meeting Andy Foster, who runs the California Commission. He's the president of it. And he told me straight up, he said it on the record. It wasn't even off the record. He said, Mike, if you know third grade level math, you can pass one of these tests. And he held up one of the urine tests. And him and referee Jack Reese talked to me and Tiffany for about an hour about all the ways to beat one of those tests. It's not hard. So that was the only testing done for this card, okay? And again, I don't want to become the new drug testing guy, but folks, this is an issue. It's an issue. And we're not playing basketball here. We're not playing football where you get an injury timeout and you have teammates who come in and you get to wear a freaking helmet. This is boxing. There's no pads, there's no helmets, there's no timeouts, there's no teammates who could come in and fight for you. This is serious shit. So those of you who are giving me shit for asking these questions about drug testing, fuck you. This is an important thing that we need to talk about. Now, let's talk about Terence Crawford's win over John Molina. John Molina missed weight, and because of that, again, it carried over into the ring. This was the worst he's ever looked. He's never been Pernell Whitaker 2.0, but his feet were just dragging. He almost looked drunk. It was almost like a poor man's Emmanuel Augustus kind of impression. Just not as good, right? So Terence Crawford just slowly, systematically beat him down. And finally, there was a mercy stoppage in the 8th round. He had Molina pretty jacked up, and he was going down anyway. It was actually a beautiful body shot that did it. Molina could eat headshots all day, but he had Molina up on the ropes and just came down and nailed him with a great, great body shot, perfectly placed. Crawford showed a lot of skill and craft and accuracy with his punches. Not hard to do against John Molina, especially this version, but you know, I'm almost glad it didn't go a round or two, because this 8th round thing gave a show to his fans who came out there. And I love that Top Rank has wisely built up a fan base for him there in his hometown. It's so smart. And you have to think that there's little kids growing up in Omaha watching Terence Crawford who want to go and join amateur boxing clubs now. And man, American boxing needs that. So Terence Crawford defends his WBC, WBO, and Ring Magazine 140-pound titles. This fight, let's see here. I wanted to make this point. Terence Crawford, and I tweeted this, and a lot of you misunderstood it. Terence Crawford has fought 3 times this year. He scored 2 dominant knockout wins over Hank Lundy and John Molina, who again are not top elite level fighters in that division, but they are credible guys who have some good wins on their ledger. And he absolutely owned Victor Postal. He unified 2 titles in that fight and started a new lineage at 140. He's the champ at junior welterweight. I think he's absolutely a contender for Fighter of the Year. And that's what I said in my tweet. And a lot of you are responding saying, no way, man, it's Carl Frampton. Yes, Carl Frampton is easily, in my opinion, and I've said this before, the 2016 Fighter of the Year. Absolutely. But in terms of top 5, 6 contenders, Terence Crawford's one of them. He's had a good year. He hasn't set the world on fire with his performances. They haven't been as dramatic as you go back a couple years, 2.5 years, to that win over Yuriorkis Gamboa. That was high drama. You know, that was a great performance. hasn't really reached those heights, but he's been dominant and fighting 3 times. How many elite level fighters fought 3 times this year, guys? How many? Not many, right? So he's absolutely up there. In the co-main, Raymundo Beltran scores a 7th round knockout over Mason Meynard. This was a lightweight fight. And now Beltran, who started his career in 1999, was a sparring partner for Manny Pacquiao. Has had a couple of tough breaks, had a controversial draw with Ricky Burns back in 2013. Most people thought he deserved to win that fight. This was a good win for him. Mason Meynard was a prospect that was really starting to gain some steam. He had had some exciting knockout wins, I think on Showbox, that's Showtime Boxing's prospect series. And he was starting to get some attention. And man, just the difference in class in this fight. Beltran just owned this kid, and you could see how frustrated and tired that Meynard was getting in the later rounds. And it was just a matter of time. And it was a beautiful, I think, left hook from Beltran. I think that, Mason Meynard was finding some good work with the body, but he was shooting it. He was dipping down to shoot the body shot, and he was keeping his right hand low, and he was coming straight back up from it. He wasn't moving like this. He wasn't dipping. He wasn't spinning out. He was shooting the body shot and backing straight up like this. It's bad enough like if you stayed crouched and backed straight up, but he was coming straight up, then backing up. And Beltran saw it a few times, timed it, right there, made it right into it, done. Here's my problem with this. And again, the theme of this episode, Beltran not in VADA, not a VADA enrolled fighter. Neither is Meynard, but Beltran has been busted for doping. He was busted last year for taking, the steroid stanozolol last year, right? So one of his fights that I think was a win for him was changed to a no contest. You had a guy busted last year for doping, and he's not enrolled in VADA. And Top Rank's putting him on a co-feature, and HBO Boxing is putting him on a co-feature. That isn't cool. That can't happen, okay? So, good win for him, but there's that little asterisk next to it. It'd be one thing if this guy had never had a history, but he just popped last year, just last year. So, man, this is not a good look, and we need to talk about it more, and we need to be vocal about it on Twitter. We need to tweet fighters, we need to tweet promoters, we need to tweet network people, commentators, media members. Everybody needs to talk about this. It is an important thing, guys. But enough of last week's stuff. Let's take a look at what's coming up this week in boxing. This Friday night from the Fantasy Springs Casino, a couple miles east of Los Angeles on HBO Latino, Vyacheslav Shabranskyy is taking on Sullivan Barrera in a 10-rounder light heavyweight fight. This is a good matchup. For Shabranskyy, I've talked about him before. You guys know I covered him at the World Series of Boxing with the LA Matadors back when he was still amateur. He's someone who always brings it. He was really rough around the edges back then. They've done a very good job with him, his training, his team, just fine-tuning some stuff. And it'll be interesting to see how he looks against Sullivan Barrera. Styles make fights. You remember Barrera fought Andre Ward recently and gave Ward some tough moments, but Ward controlled him, dropped him, right? Ward clearly won that fight. It'll be interesting to see. Can Shabranskyy do more against Barrera? Just because of their styles, I think it'll be a more physical fight with bigger punches landed. Can he do more against Barrera than Andre Ward did? That would say a lot. And if he can drop and hurt and stop Barrera, that would be a massive statement. But either way, if he were to go in there and dominate Barrera and not get too marked up in the process, because remember, Ward got touched up a lot by Barrera in their fight. That says a lot because this guy is still a prospect. Also on this card, oh, and by the way, both men are enrolled in VADA testing. So there you go. Also on this card, prospects Eddie Gomez, Ronnie Rios, Antonio Orozco, and others are on this card. Golden Boy, they have fights on Friday and Saturday, and all their prospects are fighting. Not all of them, but a good number of them. I love it. That's awesome. You're keeping these guys busy. And I do believe they're going to stream a lot of these prospect fights, so look for that. On Saturday, we'll start over in Russia. Alexander Povetkin, back in the ring, going up against Bermane-Stiverne. Neither of these guys have fought this year. The last time they fought was November of 2015. Both fighters are enrolled in VADA testing. So, look, Povetkin had some issues before. Stiverne's had some issues before. They're both enrolled in VADA testing, guys. So this fight is on the up and up. For Bermane-Stiverne, really it comes down to weight. He's just not a very disciplined man. Not a very disciplined fighter. He weighed 239 pounds for Deontay Wilder. He weighed 255 pounds for his last fight. How big will he be for this fight? And I think that will tell you how long it goes. I think if Stiverne, who, after winning the WBC title against Chris Arreola, ballooned to upwards of 300 pounds. If he comes into the ring weighing 260 or something against Povetkin, I think Sasha's going to just crush him. I think Alexander Povetkin's going to destroy him. If he comes in there in the 230s, maybe we've got an entertaining competitive fight here. But obviously, I like Povetkin. I actually like him by late stoppage. And that sets up a fight between him and Wilder. We don't know the timeline yet. The WBC has to mandate all that. But sometime next year, I would hope it's sooner than later. You got to think Wilder, who had surgery on his right hand and right bicep, is going to need time, and he's going to need a tune-up fight. So it's not going to happen next, but later in the spring. I think if Wilder fights, I think they were talking about a January or February date for Wilder to get back in the ring. You know, probably around April to May, we should finally see Wilder and Povetkin fight. It's been a long time coming. If somehow Stiverne pulls an amazing upset here, then you're going to see a rematch between Stiverne and Wilder. Does anyone really want to see that? The first fight was so one-sided. I wouldn't want to see it. So, you know, it's probably better for boxing if Povetkin wins this fight, and I do think he will. Here in LA at the Forum, the legend, Bernard Hopkins, in what he promises will be his last fight, but we've heard this before, going up against Joe Smith Jr., who scored, I think, the upset of the year, at least the top 2 or 3 candidate for upset of the year with his crushing knockout of Andres Fonfara back in June. Interesting matchup. And look, in terms of craft, experience, ring smarts, all of it, obviously Bernard Hopkins is on a completely other stratosphere than Joe Smith Jr. But considering their ages, considering where they're at, considering that Joe Smith Jr. is probably the overall better athlete than Bernard Hopkins, and absolutely the stronger guy who hits harder and is coming off this crushing knockout win, I think, you know, it's pretty damn impressive for B-Hop to go out with this fight. But look, he caught Fonfara slipping. Fonfara has a lot of mistakes, and Fonfara was a huge favorite in that fight. And he had touched Joe Smith up a few times in the opening round of that fight. I think that we should see B-Hop win a decision here and just outbox, outsmart, outcraft Joe Smith. I don't think it's going to be the most entertaining fight ever. I think the post-fight press conference is going to be a lot more entertaining because Hopkins loves to talk. As I saw today, they actually had the media workouts today at the gym I train at, the City of Angels boxing gym near downtown LA. It's only like 3 miles from my house. It was crazy to see B-Hop in the gym that I work out at every other night. And man, he talked and talked. He was supposed to work out. He didn't even work out. He talked so damn much. He didn't even work out. Got up in the ring and took some pictures with all the undercard fighters, all the young guys, and just talked to the media. Dude just loves to hear his own voice. So the post-fight presser should be a lot of fun. It'd be smart for HBO to stream that shit. They probably won't, but if I get a chance, I will film it and I will post it, guys. But this is a stacked card. Alexander Usyk, the undefeated cruiserweight titleist, is fighting for the first time in America and the first time on HBO. He's with K2 Promotions, and Tom Loeffler and those guys want to build him up here. You guys saw the video I posted recently where we had a little lunch with him and his team, and they have big goals, man. So this is kind of an audition for him. And he is not in there against the slouch. He's up against the South African fighter, Tabiso Chunu. And this guy, his record isn't beautiful, 17-2 with 11 knockouts, but he is not a slouch. I've seen footage of him. He's a good fighter. So this will be a good, stern challenge for Alexander Usyk. I do find it concerning. Got to say it. Usyk is not enrolled in VADA testing. Chunu is in VADA testing. In the main event, Bernard Hopkins, not enrolled in VADA testing. Joe Smith Jr. is enrolled in VADA testing. Don't love that. I got to be honest. I don't love that, guys. In the co-feature, Joseph Diaz Jr. is going up against Horacio Garcia. Joseph Diaz Jr. is enrolled in VADA testing. Like that. Also, Jason Quigley is fighting Jorge Melendez. Quigley is a prospect who's rising up the ranks in the middleweight division. No VADA there either. Don't like that. Also, prospects Christian Gonzalez and Yamaguchi Falcao, another guy that I covered in the World Series of Boxing. They're fighting as well. So this is a stacked card, top to bottom. It should be a lot of fun. It's the last major card of the year. So we'll do a TNC next week, talking about all that and any more news and notes. I'm hoping by then that a Golovkin-Jacobs fight gets signed. I talked to Gennady Golovkin's publicist Saturday, and he seemed to be very, very confident that it's going to get signed. He couldn't say anything on the record, but he seemed very confident. So hopefully we'll have that to talk about next week. And then, of course, we'll review this action. And that will be the last one for the year, but it won't be the last video for the year. I'm going to have some year-end awards and stuff like that coming up. But that's it for this week. I'm going to chill here in my robe and sip my wine. I'll see you at the fights. Any of you who are going to the forum Saturday, get at me, tweet me, whatever. I'll come up in your section and say hi.